Georgia Democratic Congressman Hank Johnson, who is a member of the Judiciary Committee. Congressman, thank you very much. I think let's start there. We have been in these ground-shifting moments before where we've seen the nation cry out in pain, maybe not to the degree of this, but the nation cry out in pain, and lawmakers promise action, and it hasn't happened. Is this time going to be different?
Yeah, we've seen a similar situation take place in terms of gun violence in the country. And there have been many instances where we thought that we were on the precipice of legislation that would get at the issue of too many weapons in too many hands in America, and it hasn't happened yet. And here we are at a new moment that appears to be one where the American people understand the threat that Black lives live under in America. And it's something that only Black people have been able to relate to until the nation and the world saw the shocking demise of George Floyd under the knee of a police officer for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Then things sunk in. It's a new moment now in America, and America and its legislature may be ready to pass some very common sense legislation that represents a paradigm shift in police accountability in America.
Let's put on the screen some of what the House bill has. There's local police providing data and tracking information on use of force, funding to investigate local departments, bans on chokeholds and carotid holds, bans on no-knock warrants, a national database of police misconduct. There's an effort to limit qualified immunity. Republicans have said, from the limited amount of information that we've gotten, that some of those things would not fly. The president has said that he wasn't on board with the House legislation. Where do you have, or what things are you willing to compromise on in order to be able to work with Republicans to get something passed?
Well, I mean, you can't compromise your values. This bill, the Justice in Policing Act, is a reflection of the values of America. And if Republicans are so out of touch that they can't get with these very common sense reforms, then we're probably not going to get very much done, because this legislation, as it is currently crafted, is very moderate. It's not earth-shattering, but it's very practical. Things like reform to Section 18-242, use of the civil rights laws to prosecute police officers, to lower the burden somewhat. Still a very high burden, but to lower that burden in such a way that it would enable more prosecutions to be successful, more reasonable standard of proof in those cases. 1983 actions, civil liability for police officers, some minor tweaks that would open the door for more of those cases to be prosecuted successfully by citizens when injured by police officers or killed by police officers. And so these are just some very small, and to collect data and to forward data to the Department of Justice on killings of African Americans, and even on other police data in terms of interactions with African Americans and other people in this country. These are just common sense reforms. And if my friends on the other side of the aisle don't want to get with it, they just don't want to do police reform.
Well, let's connect some dots here, because the way that the American public can hold their lawmakers accountable is by voting them out of office. Yesterday, we saw a primary in your home state of Georgia, and there were massive problems in certain counties for the voting machines that were broken, for ballots that weren't available, long lines, people waiting for hours to cast a ballot. Do you consider what happened in Georgia yesterday to be voter suppression?
Well, I think that very suspicious activity occurred, which seemed to be confined to areas where minorities, including African Americans, predominantly live. That's rather surprising. But then again, when you look at Georgia's history of voter suppression, it's not really surprising. But I'll tell you what yesterday illustrated is that you can't get away from a pencil and a pen with a paper ballot with fill in the bubbles, scanning the results into an OptiScan machine, and then counting the results of the election in that old-fashioned way. When we go to the electronic voting machines, like Georgia just spent $110 million to purchase last year from a favored vendor who has political leanings, and you spend that money, but you can't train the people on how to use the machines, and then the machines are perhaps not as foolproof as once thought. There were some malfunctions yesterday in the operations of the machines. It was just a complete debacle, an embarrassment, another embarrassment to the state of Georgia. And we need to go back to the old-fashioned way of voting, where we have a paper ballot that provides for a way of conducting a meaningful recount.
Yeah, a Scantron. Congressman Hank Johnson, we're going to get more into this story coming up a little later and what might be done to protect the vote in November down in your state. Thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Katie.
And now